They chose someone else, but why they still can't forget you. Stay with me, and don't rush past this, because what you're about to hear isn't about rejection in the way most people understand it. It's about a kind of connection that doesn't disappear just because a choice was made. It's about the strange, confusing space where someone moves on with their life, yet carries you with them in ways they don't know how to explain or release. When you first realized they chose someone else, it probably felt like the ground dropped out from under you. One moment, there was possibility, hope, a future you could almost touch. The next, there was a reality you never asked for. A reality that felt unfair, abrupt, and deeply personal. You may have asked yourself 100 questions in a single night. What did they have that I didn't? Where did I fall short? Was everything we shared just an illusion? Those questions are heavy, and they can live inside you for a long time if no one ever helps you look at them honestly. Here's the truth that hurts at first but eventually brings clarity: they didn't choose someone else because you were lacking. They chose someone else because of what choosing you would have required from them. Choosing you wasn't just about affection. It wasn't just about chemistry or comfort. Choosing you meant choosing depth. It meant choosing emotional honesty. It meant choosing a path that asked them to confront parts of themselves they were used to avoiding. You weren't easy in the shallow sense. You were easy in the real sense. You made it safe for them to be seen. And for someone who has learned to survive by staying on the surface, safety at that level can feel overwhelming. That's why they still can't forget you. People don't forget connections that changed how they saw themselves. They don't forget conversations that made them feel understood in a way they hadn't experienced before. They don't forget the person who didn't just accept their story, but quietly read between the lines of it. With you, they felt more than attraction. They felt recognition. And recognition is not something you replace easily. The person they chose fits into their current life without demanding too much change. That connection likely feels smoother, simpler, more predictable. It doesn't push them to grow in uncomfortable ways. It doesn't force them to examine their emotional limits. It allows them to stay largely as they are. You didn't offer that. You offered something that asked for presence. Accountability. Courage. And while that kind of love is powerful, it also requires readiness. Not everyone reaches that readiness at the same time. This doesn't mean their choice was fake. It means it was aligned with where they were, not with what they felt most deeply. That distinction matters. Because feelings don't disappear just because someone makes a practical decision. Emotions don't shut off when logic takes over. They simply get pushed into quieter places. And quiet feelings don't die. They echo. They still think about you when something reminds them of a conversation you once had. When they laugh at something that you would have understood immediately. When they feel misunderstood in moments where your presence would have made things lighter. They remember how you listened. How you didn't rush them. How you saw their contradictions and didn't try to fix them or run from them. That kind of acceptance leaves a mark. And here's the part that's hard to accept but important to hear: them not forgetting you doesn't mean they are coming back. Sometimes people carry a connection as a memory, not a destination. Sometimes they live with the quiet knowledge that they touched something real but didn't have the courage or capacity to stay with it. That knowledge becomes part of their inner life. You may notice it in small, confusing ways. A message that feels unnecessary. A glance that lingers too long. A sense that they are present but distant at the same time. Those moments aren't accidents. They're signs of unresolved feeling, not unfinished choice. And this is where your pain has likely lived the longest. Because being unforgettable without being chosen feels like standing halfway between meaning and loss. It validates the connection, but denies the future you imagined. It keeps you wondering whether things could still change. But listen carefully now, because this is where your story begins to shift. You were not meant to be a lingering thought in someone else's life. You were not meant to be the quiet comparison they carry while building a different future. You were not meant to be remembered instead of chosen. What you offered was not too much. It was simply more than they could hold at that stage of their life. And that truth, once you allow it to settle, begins to free you. You stop asking why they couldn't choose you and start seeing what choosing you would have required. You stop personalizing their limitations. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's readiness. You begin to understand that timing and capacity matter just as much as connection. They may love the person they chose. They may even build a life with them. But love that is built on ease does not erase love that was built on depth. It simply coexists with it, often unspoken, often unresolved. And that unresolved space is not yours to live in. You don't need to stay emotionally available to someone who made a different choice. You don't need to keep the door open just because they still feel something. Feeling without action is not a promise. Memory without commitment is not an invitation. You deserve clarity. You deserve presence. You deserve a love that doesn't hesitate. As time passes, you'll notice that the ache changes shape. At first, it's sharp and personal. Later, it becomes quieter, more reflective. You begin to see the connection not as something you lost, but as something that showed you your own depth. You realize how deeply you can love. How intuitively you understand others. How much emotional intelligence you bring into a connection. Those qualities didn't disappear with their choice. They came back to you. And slowly, the focus shifts. You stop watching to see if they'll remember you. You start paying attention to how you feel when you imagine your future without waiting. You realize you don't want to be unforgettable at the cost of being alone. You don't want to be the one that got away if it means never being fully arrived for. You want to be chosen clearly. And here's the quiet ending that doesn't feel like an ending at all. One day, someone will choose you without hesitation. Without comparison. Without fear. They won't need to be convinced. They won't need time to figure out whether depth scares them. They will meet you where you already stand. When that happens, you won't wonder why someone else couldn't forget you. You'll understand that they weren't meant to stay. They were meant to show you the truth of who you are and what kind of love you deserve. And from that truth, a different kind of love will grow, one that doesn't leave you wondering, waiting, or half-seen. That is where your story is going now. Stay with me, because this part is where the story deepens in a way that most people never talk about. This is where the focus slowly shifts from what they did, to what you are finally seeing. And what you're seeing now may be uncomfortable at first, but it's also the beginning of real emotional freedom. When someone chooses someone else but still can't forget you, it creates a strange kind of emotional noise. You feel pulled in two directions at once. On one side, there's the reality, they made a choice that didn't include you. On the other side, there's the lingering energy, the memories, the unfinished conversations, the sense that something real was left unresolved. Living between those two realities is exhausting. For a long time, you probably tried to make sense of it by replaying the past. You went over moments again and again, searching for clues. A look. A tone. A pause. Something that might explain how a connection so alive could end with such quiet finality. You wondered if you misread them, or if they misread you. You wondered if timing could have changed everything. That mental loop is incredibly human. It's what we do when our heart doesn't match the outcome. But here's what you're beginning to understand now: clarity doesn't come from re-examining the past. It comes from understanding capacity. They chose someone else because that person matched what they were capable of sustaining at that time in their life. Not what they felt most deeply. Not what challenged them most honestly. But what felt manageable. Familiar. Less demanding of emotional courage. You, whether you realized it or not, asked for more just by being who you are. You didn't need to demand commitment or force conversations. Your presence alone invited depth. Your questions weren't superficial. Your listening wasn't casual. You didn't skim the surface of their world, you noticed the cracks, the contradictions, the quiet fears they didn't voice. That kind of connection feels incredible when someone is ready. When they're not, it feels destabilizing. So they stepped away from the destabilization and toward stability. But stability without depth has a cost. And that cost shows up later, in moments they didn't expect. They still can't forget you because forgetting you would mean forgetting the version of themselves they were with you. The version that felt more open. More honest. Less armored. That version existed, even if they didn't know how to live as it long term. And this is the part that changes how you see everything. They didn't choose someone else instead of you. They chose who they could be instead of who they might become. That choice wasn't about love alone. It was about fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being seen too clearly. Fear of having to grow faster than they felt ready for. You became a symbol of that growth. Not intentionally. Not consciously. But emotionally. That's why they still think of you when they feel misunderstood. When they feel restless. When something feels missing even though nothing is technically wrong. You represent an unanswered question in their life. But unanswered questions don't always lead to changed decisions. And that's where your healing truly begins. You're starting to realize that being unforgettable doesn't always mean being meant to stay. Some connections are catalysts. They arrive, shake something loose inside us, and then move on. They leave us changed, even if they don't remain. You were a catalyst for them. And they were a catalyst for you too. Because through this experience, you learned something essential about yourself. You learned how deeply you love. How present you can be. How intuitively you connect. You learned that you don't want surface-level bonds. You want honesty. Reciprocity. Emotional availability. And now, you're no longer willing to settle for less than that. This is where the emotional dynamic shifts. You stop hoping that their memory of you will turn into action. You stop waiting for regret to become courage. You stop interpreting small signs as promises. You begin to understand that someone can miss you and still not be able to choose you. Someone can carry love and still walk away from it. Someone can feel deeply and still live shallowly. And none of that is a reflection of your worth. It's a reflection of their limits. That realization doesn't make the connection meaningless. It contextualizes it. It puts it in the right place in your story. You also begin to see how much emotional space you gave them after they chose someone else. How you still held room in your heart for, maybe someday. How part of you stayed slightly open, just in case. Letting go of that space is hard. It feels like closing a door you once hoped would open again. But what you're really doing is reclaiming energy that was never meant to be stuck in waiting. Waiting isn't neutral. It drains you quietly. As you pull your energy back, something unexpected happens. You feel more grounded. More present in your own life. You notice that your moods stabilize. Your thoughts slow down. You don't feel that constant background tension anymore. You're not healing by forgetting them. You're healing by choosing yourself. You also begin to understand that love isn't proven by how much someone remembers you after leaving. It's proven by how they show up when staying is hard. And staying was hard for them. That truth hurts, but it also sets you free. Because it means you no longer have to audition for a role in someone's life who already cast themselves elsewhere. You don't have to wait for them to realize what they lost. You don't have to remain emotionally available out of loyalty to a connection that isn't being reciprocated. You are allowed to move on, even if they haven't forgotten you. You are allowed to choose peace, even if they live with questions. This is where your inner voice becomes clearer. It tells you that you want to be with someone who doesn't hesitate. Someone who doesn't need comparison to know your value. Someone who doesn't choose safety over truth when things get real. You want to be met, not remembered. And slowly, you start living that truth. You invest more in yourself. In friendships that feel mutual. In routines that ground you. In dreams that don't revolve around someone else's availability. You stop asking, what if? You start asking, what's next? That shift is powerful. It doesn't erase the past. It puts it in perspective. The connection becomes something meaningful that happened, not something that defines you. And one day, you'll look back and see this clearly: they couldn't forget you because you showed them something real. But you didn't lose them, you outgrew the version of love they were capable of giving. The love meant for you won't choose someone else. It won't hesitate. It won't stay silent. It won't leave you wondering where you stand. It will recognize you immediately, not as a risk, but as home. And when that love arrives, you won't need to ask why someone else couldn't forget you. You'll understand why they were never meant to stay. Stay with me, because this part is where the story finally shifts from understanding them to fully reclaiming yourself. This is where the emotional fog lifts, not all at once, but enough for you to see clearly where you stand and where you are going. This is the part people rush past, but it's the most important one, because it's where your healing stops depending on anyone else. At some point, you begin to realize something subtle but powerful. Their inability to forget you is no longer the center of your emotional world. It exists, yes, but it doesn't control you. It doesn't define your days. It doesn't sit in your chest the way it used to. You can acknowledge it without needing it to mean anything for your future. That shift didn't happen because time magically fixed everything. It happened because you stopped trying to extract meaning from their memory of you and started listening to your own experience. For a long time, part of you believed that if they couldn't forget you, then maybe the story wasn't really over. Maybe it was paused. Maybe it was just waiting for the right moment. That belief kept you emotionally tethered, even when you tried to move forward. It wasn't obsession, it was hope mixed with unfinished understanding. But hope that lives without action slowly turns into self-betrayal. You didn't see it that way at first. You told yourself you were being patient, compassionate, open-hearted. You told yourself that real connections take time and that people move at different speeds. And all of that is true, up to a point. The line gets crossed when patience starts costing you your peace. Now, looking back, you can see how often you minimized your own needs to make room for their uncertainty. How you waited quietly instead of asking for clarity. How you stayed emotionally available long after they had chosen a different path. You're not ashamed of that version of yourself anymore. You understand why you did it. You cared deeply. You believed in what you felt. You trusted the connection. But you also see now that love without mutual direction leaves one person standing still while the other moves on. And you were done standing still. What changes next is not dramatic. There's no big emotional break. No sudden anger. No burning bridges. Instead, there's a calm decision that settles in you. A quiet knowing that you don't want to live as someone's emotional memory while building a life that doesn't include you. You don't want to be the one they think about when something feels missing. You don't want to be the comparison they never speak out loud. You don't want to be the almost that lingers forever. You want to be chosen clearly, consistently, and without hesitation. That desire doesn't come from ego. It comes from self-respect. You begin to notice how your body responds when you imagine a future where you're not waiting. Where you're not checking for signs. Where you're not wondering if today will be the day they finally realize something. Your body relaxes. That relaxation tells you everything you need to know. You also start seeing the connection differently. You no longer romanticize the pain or the longing. You no longer frame the struggle as proof of depth. You recognize that while the connection was meaningful, it was also incomplete. Depth alone is not enough. Feeling alone is not enough. Understanding without commitment is not enough. And you don't want, almost, any more. This is where forgiveness quietly enters the picture, not forgiveness for them choosing someone else, but forgiveness for yourself. Forgiveness for staying longer than you should have. For hoping longer than was healthy. For believing that your patience would eventually be rewarded with clarity. You forgive yourself because you see now that you were acting from love, not weakness. And that forgiveness frees you. You stop replaying conversations in your head. You stop wondering how things might have gone differently if you'd said one more thing or waited one more week. You accept that the story unfolded exactly as it needed to, not to punish you, but to teach you. It taught you what kind of love you don't want. It taught you what kind of partner you can't be with. It taught you what your heart actually needs. Those lessons stay with you, quietly shaping how you move forward. You also begin to notice a change in how you relate to other people. You're more selective, not in a guarded way, but in an honest way. You don't rush emotional intimacy. You don't project potential onto people who haven't shown you consistency. You listen to actions more than words. You're not colder. You're clearer. You also stop being impressed by intensity. By big gestures without follow-through. By chemistry that comes with confusion. You understand now that intensity can exist without safety, and safety matters more to you than it ever did before. That's growth. Your standards didn't rise out of bitterness. They rose out of experience. And because of that, you feel more at ease in your own company. Being alone doesn't feel like failure anymore. It feels like space. Space to breathe. Space to rebuild. Space to exist without emotional tension. You start enjoying small moments again. Ordinary days feel lighter. You're more present with friends. More focused on your own goals. More connected to who you are when you're not waiting for someone else's emotional availability. This doesn't mean you never think about them. You do. But those thoughts don't derail you anymore. They come and go like memories of a place you once lived, not somewhere you're trying to return to. You can wish them well without wishing yourself back into their life. That's a powerful place to be. And here's where the deepest realization settles in: their inability to forget you is not a sign that you should hold on. It's simply evidence that the connection mattered. Nothing more, nothing less. It doesn't obligate you. It doesn't require a response. It doesn't mean you're meant to wait. It just means you touched something real. And touching something real doesn't always mean staying forever. Some people enter our lives to awaken parts of us, not to walk with us through every chapter. They come, they shift us, and then they leave us better prepared for what's next. You were that person for them. And they were that person for you. The difference is, you're ready to keep going. You're no longer defining yourself by being unforgettable. You're defining yourself by being present in your own life. You're choosing experiences that nourish you instead of drain you. You're choosing clarity over chemistry alone. You're choosing peace over prolonged longing. And that choice changes the trajectory of everything. Because the love meant for you will not feel like this. It will not require you to interpret silence or compete with someone else's comfort. It will not leave you questioning where you stand. It will choose you back. When that love arrives, and it will, you'll recognize it not by intensity, but by ease. Not by anxiety, but by calm. Not by wondering, but by knowing. You won't need to ask why someone else couldn't forget you. You'll understand that they were never meant to walk the rest of the road with you. They were meant to show you the depth you carry, and then let you move forward to someone who can meet it fully. And in that understanding, you'll finally feel complete, not because someone remembered you, but because you remembered yourself. Stay with me, because this part is where everything you've been slowly understanding finally settles into your bones. This is the phase where you don't just know the truth intellectually, you start living from it emotionally. And that changes the way you breathe, the way you rest, the way you imagine your future. There's a quiet moment that arrives after everything else has been processed. It doesn't come with tears or anger or longing. It comes with stillness. You wake up one day and realize that the weight you were carrying isn't there in the same way. The questions that once looped endlessly in your mind don't feel urgent anymore. You can think about them without needing answers. That's when you know something important has shifted. You're no longer trying to understand why they couldn't forget you. You're no longer trying to decode what it means that they still carry you emotionally. That curiosity fades because it stops being relevant to your life. You don't need to be remembered by someone who didn't choose you in action. You needed to remember yourself. For a long time, you were living in emotional comparison without realizing it. Comparing what you shared with what they chose. Comparing depth with stability. Comparing intensity with consistency. You tried to figure out which one mattered more, which one was real. Now you see that the question itself was wrong. The truth is simpler: real love doesn't ask you to compete with comfort. It doesn't leave you half in, half out. It doesn't keep you in emotional suspense while promising meaning. Real love feels clear. And clarity is something you didn't have with them. Not because you didn't communicate well enough, not because you didn't try hard enough, but because clarity requires mutual readiness. One person cannot create it alone. You've stopped blaming yourself for that. You also start seeing how much strength it took to love the way you did. You didn't hold back. You didn't play games. You didn't protect yourself with distance or indifference. You showed up honestly. You were open. You were present. That kind of courage matters. It matters even if the outcome wasn't what you hoped for. Especially then. You no longer regret being vulnerable. You regret only the moments where you doubted yourself because someone else couldn't meet you. And even that regret softens as you realize it was part of learning your own boundaries. You now understand that boundaries are not walls. They are clarity. You don't need to shut down to protect yourself anymore. You simply don't invest where there is no return. You don't stay where effort is one-sided. You don't wait where there is no direction. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you aligned. You notice how differently you move through life now. You're less reactive. Less anxious. You don't read into silences the way you used to. You don't assume meaning where none has been offered. You trust what's shown, not what's imagined. This trust didn't come easily. It was built through disappointment, reflection, and choosing yourself again and again when it would have been easier to cling. That choice reshaped you. You also begin to see the connection for what it truly was. Not a mistake. Not a failure. Not something you need to erase. It was a chapter that served a purpose. It showed you the depth you're capable of. It showed you what kind of emotional intimacy you want. It showed you what you will no longer settle for. It was real, but it was not complete. And incomplete things are not meant to be carried forever. You stop wishing things had ended differently. You stop rewriting the story in your head. You accept that some connections are meant to open you, not stay with you. They arrive, they change you, and then they leave you better prepared for what's next. That acceptance feels peaceful. You also notice that your self-talk has changed. You're kinder to yourself. You don't criticize your past decisions the way you used to. You don't call yourself foolish for hoping. You don't shame yourself for loving deeply. You understand now that loving deeply is a strength. It only becomes painful when it's not reciprocated. And reciprocity is something you value deeply now. You don't want someone who feels conflicted. You don't want someone who chooses you only when it's convenient. You don't want someone who carries you in memory instead of meeting you in the present. You want to be met. That desire doesn't feel desperate anymore. It feels calm. It feels reasonable. It feels grounded in self-respect. You're also no longer afraid of being alone. Solitude doesn't scare you the way it once did. You've learned that being alone is far less painful than being emotionally neglected. You'd rather have peace than proximity without presence. This realization anchors you. You're not rushing toward the next connection. You're not filling the space just to avoid discomfort. You're letting yourself exist fully as you are, trusting that the right connection will meet you in that wholeness, not try to complete you, not compete with your peace. You feel more solid now. And here's the quiet, final truth that lands without drama. Them not forgetting you was never meant to pull you back. It was meant to remind you of who you are. You are someone who leaves an impact. Someone who loves deeply. Someone who creates emotional safety. Someone who sees others clearly. Those qualities will be met by the right person, not avoided. When that happens, love won't feel like longing or wondering. It will feel like recognition without fear. Choice without hesitation. Presence without confusion. You won't need to ask why someone else couldn't forget you. Because you'll be too busy living a love that doesn't forget to choose you, every day. And that is where your story truly continues. Stay with me, because this part is not about closure in the way movies show it. There's no dramatic conversation, no sudden apology, no moment where everything clicks into place perfectly. This part is quieter than that, but it's also the strongest point of your entire journey. This is where you stop orbiting a story that ended and begin fully inhabiting the life that's still unfolding for you. By now, you've noticed something undeniable. You're not the same person you were when they chose someone else. Back then, the loss felt like it defined you. It colored your mornings, crept into your nights, shaped the way you looked at yourself. You questioned your value, your timing, your instincts. You wondered if loving the way you did was a flaw. Now, that question doesn't even make sense anymore. You see clearly that the way you loved was never the problem. It was honest. It was present. It was deep. The pain came not from loving, but from loving someone who couldn't meet you in the same place. And that distinction changes everything. You're no longer trying to rewrite the past so it hurts less. You're no longer trying to extract lessons in a way that feels forced. The lessons have already settled naturally. They show up in how you move through the world now. You trust yourself more. That trust didn't come from success. It came from survival. From sitting with heartbreak without numbing it. From letting disappointment pass through you instead of hardening you. From choosing not to become smaller just because something ended. You stayed open. And that matters more than you realize. There was a time when you believed that if someone couldn't forget you, then maybe the connection was unfinished. Maybe it was waiting. Maybe it would circle back. That belief gave you comfort, but it also kept you tied to something that wasn't moving. Now you understand something deeper. Not every unfinished feeling is meant to be completed. Some feelings exist to be felt, understood, and then released. Release doesn't mean forgetting. Release means no longer organizing your life around what might have been. You've stopped checking for emotional echoes. You don't wonder what a certain song means to them anymore. You don't read into silence. You don't interpret timing as destiny. Those habits quietly faded as you became more anchored in your own experience. You don't need signs anymore. You trust reality. Reality tells you that someone who chooses you will not need to be reminded of your value. They will not hesitate. They will not keep you in the background of their life while building something elsewhere. They will meet you openly, without fear of depth. You didn't want too much. You wanted the right thing. And now, instead of longing, you feel discernment. You notice emotional availability in others more quickly. You sense when someone is present versus when they're just passing time. You don't mistake interest for investment anymore. You're not cynical. You're clear. That clarity protects your softness instead of destroying it. You're still compassionate. Still empathetic. Still capable of deep connection. But you no longer pour that depth into places where it can't be received. You've learned that depth is sacred. You also see now that being unforgettable was never meant to be a prize you carry forever. It was a phase. A mirror. A sign that you touched something real. But it was never meant to replace mutual love. Being remembered is passive. Being chosen is active. You want action now. You want consistency. You want honesty. You want someone who doesn't just feel deeply, but lives deeply. That desire doesn't make you demanding. It makes you aligned with who you've become. You've also softened toward the person who chose someone else. Not in a way that invites them back, but in a way that frees you from resentment. You understand now that they weren't trying to hurt you. They were trying to survive within their own limits. Understanding that doesn't excuse the pain. It contextualizes it. You don't need to villainize them to move on. You don't need to justify your healing with anger. You can simply acknowledge that they were not capable of the kind of love you were offering. And that's okay. Not everyone is meant to meet us at our depth. Some people come to show us what's possible. Some come to show us what we won't accept again. They played their role. Now it's time for you to play yours. You're no longer waiting for someone else's realization to validate your worth. You're not hoping regret will turn into courage. You're not watching from the sidelines of your own life. You're present. And presence feels different than longing. It feels grounded. It feels honest. It feels like your feet are finally on solid ground instead of emotional quicksand. You also notice how much lighter you feel. Not because the past didn't matter, but because you're no longer carrying it as a question. It's a memory now. A meaningful one. But it doesn't demand anything from you. That's freedom. And with freedom comes space. Space for something new, something aligned, something that doesn't need to compete with history. You're not rushing toward that next chapter. You're allowing it to arrive naturally. You know now that the right connection won't feel like suspense. It won't feel like anxiety disguised as excitement. It won't make you question your worth or your place. It will feel steady. It will feel mutual. It will feel like you don't have to convince anyone to stay. When that love enters your life, you won't need to explain your depth. You won't need to dim yourself. You won't need to wait. You'll simply be met. And when you look back at this chapter then, you won't feel sadness. You'll feel gratitude. Gratitude for the way it shaped you. Gratitude for the clarity it gave you. Gratitude for the strength you found in yourself. You'll understand that being unforgettable was never the destination. Becoming whole was. You didn't lose them. You found yourself. And that is the kind of ending that doesn't close a door, it opens every other one. Stay with me, because this final part is not about them anymore, not really. It's about the quiet strength you didn't realize you were building the entire time. It's about the version of you that exists now, shaped by love, loss, clarity, and the choice to keep your heart open without abandoning yourself. There's a moment that comes after deep emotional growth where you stop feeling like you're recovering from something. You're not healing from them anymore. You're simply living. And that difference is subtle, but profound. You no longer introduce your story with pain. When you think about what happened, it doesn't feel like a wound you have to explain or justify. It feels like a chapter that had a purpose. It taught you what connection can feel like when it's real. It taught you what it costs when it isn't mutual. And most importantly, it taught you how deeply you are capable of loving without losing yourself. That capacity didn't disappear just because someone else couldn't meet it. It matured. You've learned how to sit with your emotions instead of reacting to them. You don't push them away, and you don't drown in them either. You let them move through you. That's emotional intelligence. That's resilience. That's something no one can take from you. You also stopped romanticizing pain. At one point, longing felt like proof that something mattered. Now you understand that peace is the real proof of alignment. You don't need intensity to feel alive anymore. You don't need uncertainty to feel connected. You value calm. You value clarity. You value consistency. And that shift didn't make your world smaller. It made it safer. You trust your intuition now in a way you didn't before. You listen to your body when something feels off. You don't ignore red flags just because there's chemistry. You don't override discomfort with hope. You've learned that your nervous system is wiser than your fantasies. That wisdom came at a cost, but it was worth it. You've also stopped centering your self-worth around whether someone else sees you, remembers you, or misses you. Those things no longer define your value. They don't even interest you the way they once did. You're more interested in how you feel when you wake up. In how your days flow. In whether your life feels like it belongs to you. That's a powerful reorientation. You've noticed that you're more selective with your energy now. You don't give access easily, but when you do, it's genuine. You don't half show up. You don't play roles. You don't perform emotional availability while secretly hoping someone will change. You show up as you are. And if someone can't meet you there, you don't internalize it. You let them go with compassion, not self-doubt. That's freedom. You're also no longer afraid of endings. You understand now that endings don't erase meaning. They complete it. A connection doesn't have to last forever to be real. It just has to be honest while it exists. What you shared with them was honest. What you needed afterward was honesty with yourself. You gave yourself that. That's why you're not carrying bitterness. That's why you don't need revenge or validation. That's why you can wish them well without wanting them back. You're not detached. You're integrated. You've integrated the lessons instead of fighting them. You've allowed yourself to grow instead of hardening. You've learned that love doesn't always arrive to stay, but it always arrives to teach. And you learned. You learned that you don't want to be someone's almost. You don't want to be remembered more than you're chosen. You don't want to live in the space of potential while someone else lives in certainty. You want reciprocity. You want presence. You want love that moves toward you, not away from you. That clarity is the foundation of what comes next. Because now, when someone enters your life, they meet a version of you who knows what they want. Who doesn't negotiate their needs. Who doesn't apologize for depth. Who doesn't shrink to be easier to choose. You are not intimidating. You are intentional. And the right person will recognize that immediately. You won't have to convince them. You won't have to wait. You won't have to guess. You'll feel it in how natural it is to be yourself around them. And when that happens, this entire chapter will make sense in a way it never could before. You'll see that you were never meant to stay where you were half-held. You were meant to move forward with the lessons intact and your heart still open. That's the rarest kind of growth. Most people close themselves off after heartbreak. They become guarded. Cynical. Smaller. You didn't. You became clearer. That clarity didn't make you less loving, it made your love more precise. More intentional. More aligned with who you are now. You didn't lose your softness. You learned how to protect it. And that's why this isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of a different kind of love story. One where you don't have to disappear to be loved, where you don't have to wait to be chosen, where you don't have to wonder if you matter. You matter. Not because someone couldn't forget you, but because you remembered yourself. And that is the most powerful love story of all.
Stay with me. If you still think about you, that's their journey. If they still feel the echo of what you shared, that's something they will carry. You don't need to carry it with them. Your life is moving forward not in reaction to what happened, but in response to what you are become. You are no longer defined by using unforgettable to someone else. You are defined by being present in your life. And from this place, love will you meet you differently. It will arrive without confusion. It will choose you without hesitation. It will feel calm, not consuming, steady, not suspenseful. When that happens, you won't look back and wonder that went wrong. You will understand that everything happened exactly as it needed to, teach you how to choose yourself without choosing your heart. And that is the kind of ending that doesn't feel like an ending at all, it feels like beginning. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to this channel and also like this video.